if we don't build structures to support and deepen in relationship with that, whatever that numinous experience is, frankly, I think we end up using it to feel good rather than actually get to know it to lead a sustainable life of service and a joyful life.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited today to be talking with JennyFinn, who is a co-founder of the Springhouse Community School. And to start with, I just want to read you her bio from their website. So JennyFinn has designed structures that foster vitality in people, communities, and organizations for nearly 30 years. She holds a Ph.D. in sustainability education and co-founded Springhouse, a school inspired by a vision to live in a world where all life thrives. Dr. Finn's research, mentoring, and teaching invites people to deepen the relationship they have with themselves in order to serve the world with greater clarity and compassion. Her work has taken many forms, including nonprofit leadership, trauma and hospice care, chaplaincy, clinical private practice, community building through the expressive arts, and education. With a dedicated and inspiring community, Dr. Finn articulated sourced design, principles that take care of life in a person, community, and place. These principles are practiced at Springhouse and shared globally with those who share the vision of a thriving world. And to me personally, she is also a friend, teacher, and fellow traveler. So welcome, Jenny.
Thank you so much. I am honored and happy to be here.
All right. So I wanted to start out by talking about, I believe you had a numinous experience at the beginning of your spiritual journey. And before I have you tell us about that, I just want to talk about that word for a second, because I really like the word numinous for this kind of experience, but it's not that commonly used. So some people might say numinous means something like mysterious or mystical or holy. And I kind of like thinking of it as a unusually meaningful experience. That to me is sort of a helpful phrasing. But to get back to it, so this numinous experience that you had, Jenny, would you be willing to share more about that with us?
I'm happy to, because it really is the center of all that I've done and all that I do. So when I usually talk about Springhouse or any of my work, I often start with this experience. I'm in my early 50s now. And when I was in I was about 20, and much of my teenage years, I spent in addiction. So addiction to alcohol, young, people's opinions of me, love addiction around a particular person. I was really seeking something to hold on to. And our culture and world gives us plenty of options to do that. So I had 3 that weren't working very well, as you can imagine. And I found myself in college very drunk at a fraternity party. And my boyfriend at the time came into the party with somebody else, another woman. And I had the thought that I wanted to harm him in some way, physically harm him, which was kind of unusual for me. And after I had that thought, it was almost like something like that. And then I heard a voice within me that said, "Put your drinks down. You will never drink again." And I haven't had a drink since that day. I walked home from the party. I was at a huge university where partying, at least in my circles, was just what you do, more than even go to class. Staying sober through that experience was a miracle. But when I reflected on what actually happened, why I was able to sustain a new way of life, much of my research and thought has been about, it actually wasn't, it was a miracle, but it was a miracle because of some particular things that I did to support myself to continue. Because not only did I stop drinking that day, I led a very different life from that point on. And that voice continued to show up in different ways and still does. It's really more of a companion now and a constant friend. But I had other experiences that awakened me to this mysterious voice, and confused me and made me wonder what was going on. But the whole time I was taking care of that relationship with that voice and taking care of the choice to live in a new way, in ways I didn't even know I was. It was upon reflection that I really am able to see how it was that I could sustain a different way of life that took better care of my life. And that much of that, all of that, was guided by whatever that voice is.
Yeah, it's interesting because in a way, sometimes the numinous experiences, sometimes they don't feel like peak experiences, but sometimes they might, how big they feel. But I think it's an interesting point that it was also then what you did from there that was so important in terms of, would you say it was sort of almost like still listening to it? I don't know what words you would put around that, but you definitely said supporting yourself. Being guided.
Must have been. It must have been, and I'm sure at some point I'll talk about the source design principles that I and we at this community have articulated, but they have everything to do with what I'm talking about right here. Because if we are to live, like you read in my bio, if we are to live, my vision is to live in a world where all life thrives. And I've had that vision for a long time, much of it motivated by my loneliness of living in a world and feeling slightly just strange, and also alone. And so, and also, there's a deeper call there. It's not just my loneliness, or I never would have stuck with it, but it is definitely in there for me. Yeah. So now I'm able to share those teachings. I'm able to, even more importantly, practice them in place over time with people, and then see when we share those principles with other communities and people, how they work there.
So anything else sort of leading up to Springhouse? Because we're definitely going to talk about Springhouse and the principles of source design. Anything standing out today that maybe touches on what I call holiness, which for me, I define it as being in connection with ourselves, others, and spirit. Anything, because of course, people's journeys, we could talk for hours and hours about it, but is anything particularly standing out when you think of that sort of idea of the word of connection that led you to Springhouse eventually?
Yeah, I think that experience with a very mystical, mysterious experience brought me closer to people. It brought me closer to myself, brought me closer to other people and to the earth. And that journey continues to go and will, thankfully, for the rest of my life, deepening in intimacy with those aspects and even beyond the earth. I was just talking to the stars the other night and thanking them for showing up. I get a great view of them and connection to them in the Blue Ridge Mountains where I am. So yeah, I think for me, what I'd like to say is that if we are to live, like I said, I think I said this, if we're to live in a world, maybe I didn't say this yet, if we are to live in a world where all life thrives, we're going to have to change the way we live. To varying degrees, we all are going to have to look and see, where am I in alignment with taking care of my life and where am I not? And we all have different assessments and journeys with that. And that seems impossible to change our lives when we have very strong survival habits. We live in a world that is in survival mode. And it seems impossible for a new way of life to be able to sprout, let alone grow. And that is where the design principles come in. But all the way up until then, I have been in systems, societal systems, whether it's education, healthcare, or criminal justice system, higher ed, elementary, high school, all of it. Churches. I've been hired or have been working in those organizations. Usually I'm brought in because they want more vitality, more life, and they don't know how to access that as an organization. So usually I'll come in and we will do something creative that really creative or courageous. So something that accesses that creativity or courage. So it might be a difficult conversation or an invitation to share something vulnerable, or we might dance together. We might make a mosaic, whatever it is. But what I found when I was doing this work in my 30s and maybe my early 40s, probably more my 30s, is that I could go and do those things in different organizations or with people, one-on-one with people, and the change that was being made was not sustained. So I would get a call from the, executive director that would say, it was great when you were here, good for about 3 weeks to a month. Now we're back in our old rhythm again. And that is because the culture, whether it's of a person or an organization or a community, is what it's oriented around. It will continue to orient around that until there's deep, considerate work around what the design is that my life is oriented around or that the organization is oriented around. And that we don't really, designs are hidden like seeds. So it's like we don't even think about that. We're just kind of doing symptom management up here with our lives and in our organizations. So I had a lot of experience before articulating source design, both with the symptom management, bringing me in to maybe light a spark, create conditions for a numinous experience to happen for the people in the organization. But that does not last. And that if we don't build structures to support and deepen in relationship with that, whatever that numinous experience is, frankly, I think we end up using it to feel good rather than actually get to know it to lead a sustainable life of service and a joyful life, one that's not so up and down. So I really learned a lot in that work. And when I moved to the Blue Ridge Mountains and started a school with some really lovely people, I knew that I did not want to continue that kind of one-off journey, that I really was interested in what would happen if a community oriented around the spark of life in a place over time and took care of that, what would happen. And I've been really fortunate going into our 10th year. I've learned a lot. I have a good sense about what will happen, at least in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And now that I'm working with people in other parts of the world, slowly, intimately, seeing what this design looks like in Africa, in Kenya, or in Denver, or here in Floyd in another organization. The beauty of this design is that it's not prescriptive. So it's articulated in a way that I hope can be respectful of people in place wherever they're using it. And that's the feedback I've gotten so far.
Yeah. So there's kind of two directions I want to go here, and I'll tell you what they are, and then we can pick one. I'm feeling ready pretty soon here to go into those design principles. It feels like we're leading up to them here. But I'm also really interested in how you're talking about orienting around and like sort of what orienting around means. And it may be necessary to talk about the principles first. So I'm going to let you decide, because when you were talking, about the one-offs and how that isn't sustainable, I was thinking like, yes, practice, and like how making something a practice is what I was immediately, making a parallel with there. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure if it's exactly the same as what you mean when you say orienting around, or if you would put a little more nuance to it. So you could go either direction. If it's easier to talk about the principles first, or if you want to talk about how you see that orienting around.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is about practice. I would say that's exactly what it means to me, to orient around. So for instance, when I was in my teenage years, my practices were drinking, getting people to like me, and I'm sure whoever's listening to this, I know I'm not the only one, and orienting around a love interest, meaning not focusing on myself, focusing on them. What are they doing? But those were my practices. And it was not sustainable and not going well. And it was not joyful for me. And I don't just mean happy. I mean, like, grateful to be alive is what joy means to me. So I had to change my practices. I mean, in order to change my life, it's changing the way that I live. And that's what I mean by orienting around. Like, I was orienting around a distorted thought that I was alone and didn't belong, and that I wasn't connected, and that I had to work to connect myself to this life. And that is distorted thinking. And I know that now because of all of the mentors, communities, and practices that have led me to take care of the numinous experience that I had with something much bigger than myself that I will never understand, but is my ultimate devotion, is to that voice. Which sometimes shows up as a voice, sometimes it's a somatic, a bodily feeling, or it's other things, but it is absolutely the center of my life through my action. It's through my practices, and that does not lead to perfection. It does not lead to perfection. It leads to, I think, vitality is what it leads to.
Mm-hmm.
And vitality includes everything. Wholeness, holiness, it includes all of it.